Hello and welcome to the Jazz Jam Podcast. I'm your host, Dwayne Gunnels, joined by my co-host, Max Levy. And on today's episode, we're going to be getting into something a little bit different. It's a live recording done by Kenny Garrett, and the album is entitled Sketches of MD, live at the Iridium, which is a club in New York City. And kind of just a little bit of an interesting story about how Max and I came upon this album and decided to review it. Max was in town in Wilmington, North Carolina for Christmas. We got to play some gigs together, but I called Max and I was like, hey, it was Christmas Eve. I was like, what are you doing? What are you up to? Let's go do some record hunting at the record store. And he was like, cool. And so we go to Yellow Dog Discs in town, which usually doesn't have the best of jazz collections in town, but we're always down to go hunting for something. So we walk in there and they have this big table set up that's not normally set up with records, and it says all records $10, and it's all of these new records. I think some of it was like record store day stuff that had been put out but was now on sale for $10. And so we kind of thumbed through all of that to see if there was anything jazz or anything that might be kind of hip on there, and we found this record for $10, and we're like, dude, Kenny Garrett and Pharaoh Sanders, we have to get this. So Max and I picked this record up for $10, and we decided, let's do this one next on the podcast. So that's how we got into doing this record.
It was a really great find. It was surprising, and I did not know that this album really existed. And it's great to see a live album from Kenny Garrett. And really, we just talked about him when we went over 5-piece band live, Chick Corea's group, and that live album. So we're kind of doing two Kenny Garretts in a row almost. Not last week, but the week, the previous episode. So we just can't get enough Kenny Garrett, it seems. I don't know.
Yeah, I certainly can't. I mean, yeah, and we'll get into the kind of why on the album. But Max, let's kind of just fill everyone in. We're sorry we didn't get around. We said we were going to do a Christmas episode. We didn't get around. We were super busy. We were playing pretty much every day that Max was in town. If we weren't playing, it was literally Christmas Eve or Christmas. So we didn't have time to record the podcast. There was just a lot going on with Max in town. But Max, why don't you give everyone kind of the brief synopsis of your visit here to Wilmington?
Well, it was a good trip, and we drove out there. It's about a 17 to 18 hour drive from Kansas City, Missouri to Wilmington, North Carolina. And the biggest part of that drive is going through North Carolina. Yep. That takes up almost 6 hours of that 17 to 18 hours. And then you got to go through Missouri. It would be much easier just going from St. Louis to Asheville, which would be, the same state to state range, but you're going from one end of Missouri to the other, and then you got to go, once you hit the mountains, you got to go right to the very end of the state for North Carolina to hit Wilmington, which is right by the ocean. So, long travel day, but we did it. We drove in one day both ways, and fortunately on the way back, my wife, Caitlin, actually drove part of the way, which was a first, I think.
Wow.
So, yeah, I was kind of surprised, but very appreciative, and she drove from Nashville to Paducah, Kentucky, which is one of the least scenic routes you can imagine.
Parts of Kentucky are really pretty.
That's true. It is pretty out there, but not too much in between those two towns. So travel ended up being pretty smooth, and you and I got to play, I think 5 gigs together, and which was really cool. Most of them duo. We did have one with a great drummer who's now in the Raleigh-Durham, North Carolina area named John Hill. And so that was a pleasant experience to play with him for a house party we played for. And we did, some different breweries in town, and it was a great time to play together. And it had been probably six months or so since you and I had played together.
Yeah. And we managed to add in 4 new tunes. Well, we had to play a couple Christmas tunes because it's Christmas time. So, but we managed to play some new tunes that we had never played before. So that was cool too, considering we don't play together all the time. So it's always fun to add some new stuff into the mix. We did Opera Vav, which was fun.
Yeah, it's a great tune. And we had, one guitar player sit in with us. So, very, very cool vibe on each of those gigs. And I actually got the pleasure to play at both the temple and the Presbyterian church. So I played for a Hanukkah service at the Reformed Temple for the Jewish service Friday night, and then the night after, Saturday, Christmas Eve, I played for the Presbyterians. So very eclectic experience and ecumenical, and just it was a good time. 8 or 9 days I was there, and it seemed to fly by.
Yeah, he just missed the mosque. He's covering most of his bases. Next time he'll play at the mosque as well. Maybe Ramadan. Maybe if you're back for Ramadan, you can.
That's right.
The mosque.
I'll have to hit that one up next time.
Yeah, they all. I mean, jazz. It's universal. So.
Right.
Cool. Well, let's get into the album a little bit, Max. Why don't you start us out with just kind of the basic history, where this was recorded, when it was recorded, and then we'll talk about the personnel.
Yeah, as I said, it's a live album from Kenny Garrett. It's one of the few that we have that are live albums from Kenny Garrett. This was released in September of 2008. It's called Sketches of MD, live at the Iridium. And the Iridium is a live music venue specializing in blues, jazz, and rock music. And it's more or less been around since 1994. It was in a different location for a couple of years and then moved to where it is now. And this is a club where the great guitar player Les Paul played weekly, starting in 1996. I think he played there every Monday until until basically the day he passed away. So he was doing every Monday at the Iridium Club. And so that's where this was recorded. And this is Kenny Garrett's debut appearance on Mack Avenue Records. So Mack Avenue is the record label for this one, which is originally based out of Detroit, Michigan. And it was founded in 1999. We've spoken about it, I think, at least once before. And it's really cool to see specifically Kenny Garrett on Mack Avenue, since Kenny Garrett himself is originally from Detroit, Michigan. So it's that Detroit connection we're getting from both the record label and the artist here. And all of these songs are Kenny Garrett originals. So another great aspect of this record.
Yeah. Is James Carter, is he on Mack Avenue Records? I know he's from Detroit as well.
I'm not sure if he's on Mack. He may be on somebody else's record that's Mack Avenue.
Okay.
I don't know if he specifically has a contract with Mack Avenue or not, but I do know that there's quite a bit of Christian McBride on Mack Avenue Records, and they have a lot of great artists on there.
Cool. Well, let's get into the personnel a little bit on this recording, Max.
Yeah, Kenny Garrett is actually playing not only the alto saxophone, but also some organ, the synthesizer, and bass clarinet. And like I said, he's originally from Detroit. We've talked about him not too long ago on the podcast. He played with greats like Duke Ellington. He was a part of Miles Davis's fusion group. And since about 1985, Kenny Garrett has had a steady solo career, touring the world as a solo artist on the alto sax, and he's just a powerhouse player, and he is definitely one of the top alto players of his generation. And then, as you alluded to, we also get a second saxophone player on the record. The only thing I like more than one saxophone is two saxophones. So we got Pharaoh Sanders, the very spiritual, the very prominent player, Pharaoh Sanders, who we've also mentioned once before on the podcast. And he unfortunately passed away pretty recently in September of 2022. And he had a big role in the development of spiritual or free jazz, as we call it. And we went over him in episode 6 of the Jazz Jam. On bass, we have Nat Reeves, who originally comes to us from Lynchburg, Virginia, born in 1955. He now teaches at the Hart School of University of Hartford. He performs internationally with a long list of artists, and he's known for his impeccable time and his big sound. He's worked with not only Kenny Garrett, but Jackie McLean, Joe Farnsworth, Eric Alexander, Harold Mayburn, and many more. So you'll see Nat Reeves' name quite a bit when you're looking at this music. And then we also get a great pianist and drummer. Dwayne, you want to tell us about them?
Yeah, one thing I want to touch on before we talk about the pianist is Pharaoh Sanders, Max said episode 6. That episode is In the Key of the Universe by Joey DeFrancesco. So if you're looking for more Pharaoh Sanders, that's the name of that that record. But yeah, so on piano and keyboards and some synthesizer, just all around keyboards, we get Benito Gonzalez. He was born in Venezuela. He's based out of New York City. He's known for combining Afro-Latin musical elements with jazz. And he made his way to the U.S. in around 2003 and began working with Jackie McLean, and then started working with Kenny Garrett, and then was Pharaoh Sanders' musical director in 2019. So kind of all those guys seem to have worked with each other, Kenny Garrett, Pharaoh Sanders, and Jackie McLean. And he's also worked with Azar Lawrence and other greats, including Bobby Hutcherson, Gary Bartz, Curtis Fuller, Lenny White, and some other players as well. And then on drums, we get Jameer Williams, and he's a thriving drummer, composer, and producer in the New York scene. He's from Houston, Texas, and went to the well-known Houston High School for the Performing and Visual Arts. And then he went on to get a degree at the New School and toured and worked with cats such as Solange Knowles, John Mayer, Pat Metheny, Jason Moran, and Dr. Lonnie Smith, the organist, as well. As well as like many other players as well. So all kind of New York City-based guys. It seems like guys who have worked in the New York scene a good amount.
Yeah, and they play really well together, as we'll display on the podcast as we get into it. And it's all in all, it's generally speaking just a really fun album. Stick around with us towards the end of each episode. We give our overall rating and our overall thoughts, so you'll want to stick in and listen and listen for that. But we're going to start out going over the first track on the record. This is called The Ring. This is, like I said, a Kenny Garrett original tune, as all of them are on this record. It's sort of an AABB form, with each section getting 4 bars to its section. So you can think about it as 4 bars of A, that's repeated. Then you get 4 bars of a B section, that's repeated. Or you could think about it as 2 chunks, whereas you got an A, that's 8 bars, and a B, that's 8 bars. But to me, it makes the most sense to think about it in chunks of 4. So 4 bars of an A theme melody, repeated. Then 4 bars of a B theme melody, that's repeated. And all in all, we're getting very sort of an ode to the John Coltrane Quartet, with the John Coltrane, McCoy Tyner sort of sound. It reminds me a lot of A Love Supreme and some of those things that we get from, 61 to 65 John Coltrane. And this one, The Ring, has a really nice melody that's shared by both the saxophone players. There's also a hint of Middle Eastern or African sounds here. And it's sort of, like I said, a modal vamp that's in a Coltrane-esque fashion. Garrett maintains nice use of space and phrasing when he's soloing. A lot of longer notes and that sort of hard spiritual vibrato that we can hear. And he's great at messing with short melodic ideas or creating themes to build off of. I want us to listen to that together. This is Kenny Garrett playing right around the 2:49 mark. Yeah, so that just showcases that great thematic development I was talking about, which also reminds me of Train.
Yeah, and I think that one thing that like Kenny Garrett and Pharaoh Sanders are so good at, and we'll kind of talk about this throughout the album, is just doing a lot with a little, like a few notes, more space, and just like making it feel good. And that there, like, there's not a whole lot of notes. There's not like really long runs or lines being played. It's just about like what can you do with like just how much can you do with a little bit, and that's kind of what we're getting from there. And how can you build those kind of shorter ideas?
You can say a lot by saying very little, and you can say nothing by saying a lot.
Yeah.
And so what he's doing, even though it's not a whole lot, it's meaningful, it's impactful, it's musically interesting. It's thematic development. You're right. Sometimes if we play too many notes, we're not saying much. If we play a smaller number of notes, maybe we're saying a lot. And that just depends on the player and how well they themselves can pull that off. And sometimes, it's great to play a lot of notes. Sometimes it's great to not play a lot of notes. It just depends on context. And contextually speaking, what Kenny Garrett is doing right there is spot on. You can say a lot by playing a little.
Yeah.
So great moment there. He continues, and I think he uses a lot of the lower range on the horn as he goes into his solo more, which is a little unexpected. Usually you would start lower and build higher, but he kind of starts, off in the middle of his range, if not higher, and then as he gets on, he goes lower on the horn. And he uses extended techniques, uses of overtones, squeals, extreme techniques that we like to call it. And we've heard that on some other Kenny Garrett that we've heard through the 5-Piece Band Live album, where he can just manipulate his tone in such a way that's so controlling, yet so spiritual and musically meaningful that it's not stifling. It's actually opening up even more what he's doing. So I want us to listen to that together. This is about a minute of that, 4:28 to about 5:30. Yeah, so it's a lot for maybe the average listener, but I think there's a lot there in terms of if you just think about it as a player or from a player's perspective, it's really hard to control it, those squeals and those extended overtones and techniques the way he's doing. It's very hard to control it in such a way that you can hear where he's tapering off, where he's doing the false fingerings and just kind of physically, acoustically, naturally moving the sound in such a way that brings it to a whole nother level. It's really challenging to do, and it's really challenging to do as well as he does in the moment on stage in the middle of a solo like that.
Yeah, and Max, can you explain some of what he's doing there as a saxophone player? Because he's kind of really getting some interesting tones and timbres going on there. Is how do you do those things? Is it all embouchure, or is it how much of it is the way you're fingering notes? What is he doing there?
Some of it is what we talk about with false fingerings, where you're playing a note and then you're covering up and using more fingers than you would naturally need to make the note happen. And so that changes the sound of the note, but not necessarily the note itself. Mm-hmm. So that's kind of what he's doing when it's loud and he's tapering off and coming off of something, and that the little interruption that's happening where the sound of the note changes, but the note itself doesn't really change. That's what he's doing there. I think a lot of it has to do with throat and throat manipulation and I think some of what he's doing is very specific to each player and how they're going about that. With overtones, it's kind of like you're, let's say, for instance, you're playing a low B flat on the instrument, but you can get out a middle B flat or sometimes a fifth, so the middle F or higher B flat, but yet your fingers are fingering the low B flat. And so what that's going to do is that's going to create a specific type of sound that, a middle register note is going to come out, but it's going to be distorted. And it's going to be in a way that seems like he's probably to you doing more than he actually is, but it's just so successfully done that that's what he's doing. And so some of that is overtones, some of it I think is throat or embouchure manipulation where you're getting those squeals. There's certain fingerings for that. We get the altissimo register fingerings for notes that are higher than the high F or F sharp for the saxophone. And so for tenor sax versus alto sax, there are different altissimo fingerings depending on which of those two you're playing. And also there's multiple types of fingerings in the altissimo register for the same note. So a lot of those higher note fingerings are going to be specific to what the player feels most comfortable with, or what the player thinks maybe is most in tune, or they are getting the desired sound that they want. And maybe there's, some distortion that they're doing with either their throat or their air or their embouchure onto one of those higher altissimo notes.
I think that's super interesting. When he does kind of the wah thing, and we heard this on like 5-piece band where he's doing the he's playing a note, he's holding a note out, and he's like, you're getting like this wah, 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 wah. Is that coming from him changing the fingering and fingering like a different note and like changing the pitch, or is that coming from him like manipulating like tonguing like on a certain note? Do you know how he's doing that?
My suspicion is that the specific wah moment is the fingers, but his tone is I think coming from throat manipulation and overblowing. And maybe he's also circular breathing there too. I'm not entirely sure. That could be part of it too. Where it's kind of, the sound is kind of going in and out at different times. I don't think that wasn't my first instinct that he was circular breathing, but that could be part of it too. Is how is he just physically breathing into the instrument? Is it circular? Is it not? I think part of it is just the natural ability to employ dynamics into your own sound. So I think he's just really great at dynamic manipulation from how much air he's using. And then the tone is manipulated by his throat and or embouchure. And then the fingers is the very moment when those wah changes or waves. It's kind of like waves that are happening. That's what I would say.
Yeah, it's just, he's so interesting to listen to, because if you like tell someone to describe like playing a saxophone, they're going to tell you blow into the saxophone and you move your fingers, right? But when we listen to Kenny Garrett, we start to realize that there can be so much more to playing a saxophone than just blowing into the instrument and moving your fingers, right? And we're realizing that he's playing the saxophone with his entire body, and we've kind of talked about how it feels like the saxophone is kind of an extension of his body, and he's definitely using lots of different parts that we might not think of, using his throat, using his fingers, and using them kind of all together, and his embouchure all collectively to create some really unique tones and different techniques on the saxophone.
Absolutely. And you know what? You mentioned I don't know if you recorded it or not, but we were talking about the album, and you were saying how great it would be to be there in person for this live performance. And I would have really enjoyed that, just to be able to tell if I could see what he was doing in those moments. Yeah. Then I would have a, very clear way to describe it for you. But I think it's a combination of those things, the way we do overtones, the way we squeal, the way we manipulate with our throat, and what specific altissimo fingerings we're doing. Or maybe he's just gunning and just throwing a lot of air out. And also you can kind of almost sing those higher notes as you're playing them. And that will also help bring out the specific tone or note that you're wanting to come out as a saxophone player. So you're kind of like singing that really high, C or whatever it is, as you're fingering it and as you're playing it and blowing air through the instrument.
Yeah.
That could also be what's going on.
Yeah, I know that trumpet players can do that too, and like they'll growl like that too by using like their throat and humming and playing at the same time. It's just cool. I mean, and it's obvious that he's doing lots of these things and mixing them into his playing. So while it may not be super intricate lines that we can break down there's so much that's going on in his playing, even though it might seem like there's not that many notes, specifically different notes being played. So I think it's awesome to kind of get into that the same way we'd get into someone who's just like Charlie Parker playing bebop lines, you know?
Absolutely. And like I said, if I were there, I would have more specifics on that. But I may actually try and find him some more clips of him playing on YouTube and give a better answer later on a different episode or something. But it's a combination of those things, I'm pretty sure. And he's just great at being able to put all that together and manipulate it in such a way that's so musically interesting and moving. We just had to talk about it. And after that solo, we get the head repeated from both the saxes, and then we get into a Pharaoh Sanders saxophone solo. And Pharaoh gives us a really great sound, nice use of space. You can tell, as we were kind of getting at with Kenny Garrett's solo, that it's not about bop phrases or how many notes can you play or, what ideas based on the language can you throw out at us. It's about going where the music takes you and developing themes and ideas and having a nice ebb and flow to your overall solo and to what you're doing. That's the key here. And for instance, we were talking about saying so much with so little. What can you do with two notes or a two-note idea? And, if you ask yourself that, Pharaoh Sanders gives you an answer to that. And I want us to listen to that together. This is 824 to 854, where he messes around with two notes and develops his solo organically. Yeah. So there you can also tell there are those moments where he's also doing some overtones and some different throat manipulation there on his sound too. So we get that both from Pharaoh Sanders and Kenny Garrett. But there's just a lesson in there somewhere with that two-note development. I don't know. What did you like that? What were you thinking with that, Dwayne?
Yeah, I just love just the rhythmic, kind of syncopated ideas and just kind of letting the groove and the rhythm speak to, and that's like this song has a really good, in this album, there's a lot of that to where it's like, how does it feel to you, and that's kind of what they're playing. They're playing what they're feeling. So I really enjoy just kind of that in the moment, play what you're feeling. And it doesn't always have to be, you don't have to always be thinking like, how can I play the most crazy, intricate thing here? Like, just play what you're feeling. And if that, and Pharaoh Sanders and Kenny Garrett, arguably two of the best at doing that and playing in just a kind of emotional, spiritual way. So it's just really, in my opinion, it's really easy to connect with passages like those when you can just kind of feel like it's coming from their soul.
Yeah, and that's a great thing about this track in particular. And we're starting out with this, which is, I really dig that as curation of the album. I think this is a great opener to what these players have to offer. It's also great to hear what Jamire Williams on the drums is doing behind all the soloists. It reminds me a lot of Elvin Jones. Great bashing, great energy. It's spot on with what's going on. There's some nice long trills during the piano solo as well that are cool to listen for. Great use of repetition. Overall, he's quite rhythmic. And the head out is after that keys solo. That great simple melody, but it's very spiritual, and all in all, it ends this first track very nicely.
Yeah, in this first track, I mean, just, you kind of mentioned it, but just really odes to John Coltrane and his quartet with McCoy Tyner and Elvin Jones. Like, it just really, really reminiscent of that. And I think these guys do a great job of playing in kind of that modal vamping kind of landscape, and it's really nice. And Benito Gonzalez with his solo, kind of, you can feel the McCoy Tyner influence in this song and a lot of what he plays. And like Max said, the Elvin Jones and Jamire Williams is playing. So yeah, it just feels like a big ode to Coltrane and Tyner here in my perspective.
Absolutely. And then we get a killer track called Intro to Africa. I think the groove on this is exceptional. I think the vibe really connected with me personally. This is definitely, as a second track on the album, was a bit of a surprise in I don't know, in its delivery to me. Dwayne, what were you thinking with this? You were tasked to go over this one. I think there's a lot here that's really great.
Yeah. This track definitely has a lot going on, and we really get a display of both saxophone players here. It starts out with just the rhythm section playing through the changes. You can also hear some humming of the melody, presumably by Garrett and Sanders at points. The changes, it's pretty simple, the structure of the song. It's just 4 bars that are repeated throughout. It's in a minor key. I think it's in E flat minor, and the last 2 bars are just a minor 2-5-1 back to E flat minor. It's nothing super intricate, but it has a really nice groove. It's at a kind of relaxed, soulful groove tempo, 74 beats a minute. And what I'm feeling here, and with the song title and with kind of the elements, is this African spiritual music, and maybe like, African, some of the slave music, spiritual music at the time, with the humming of the melody, the way that the song feels, the tempo of the song. That's what I'm getting from here, and I think that's kind of what they're trying to evoke, is that ode to Africa and African influenced music.
It also seems like it's almost a ballad. I mean, it's not, but there isn't really a ballad on the album, but this is almost one because of its tempo and the way the players are soloing on top of it, which we'll get into in a sec. But I just really dig the pocket on this one. It seems soulful, like you were talking about, spiritual, and I think there's some blues in this. There's a big blues influence on this one at certain moments, and so that really came out to me too.
Yeah, and so after they go through the form a few times with kind of like the rhythm section and the humming of the melody, like I said, Sanders comes in with the melody, which is just half notes that moves with the changes. It's nothing super crazy. It really does feel like that African spiritual music in the melody as well. And then we get kind of Kenny Garrett start to add some licks into the space in the melody, and there's just so much soul in Kenny Garrett's playing. We've talked about this before on the podcast, but it really just feels like the saxophone is an extension of himself. We've mentioned it just in the previous track. We're going to continue to talk about it. I think here at 210 to 305 it's a really good example of that. It's not crazy intricate lines. It's just music straight from his soul and from his heart, and you can really feel that. So let's take a listen for this section from Kenny Garrett here.
Woo! Yeah.
There's a melody.
That hits so hard in the groove, in the pocket, and it's blues, it's spiritual, it's soulful, and he's doing some more throat manipulation. Sounds more like just growls or kind of just a little bit more tension in his sound, but it's real and it's authentic and it's experienced and it's straight from, I don't know, life's qualms. It sounds like, it's like it just feels so, I don't know, full,
connected.
connected with it's music. It's beyond musical.
Yep.
Is what I'm trying to get at. It showcases the human experience.
Yeah, and I think it's on, in my opinion, that section, it's almost like another level of musicianship. And because Kenny Garrett can play any line, any run, any tempo, he could play a burn as fast as you want. Kenny Garrett can do that. But what he's playing here, it's just, in my opinion, it's kind of a different level of musicianship and connection to his own emotions and the emotions in the music. And it's so killing. I could listen to that just all day, every day. You could inject that into my veins, please.
I'll have a 5th vaccine of that, please.
Yes, yeah. We don't need COVID vaccines. I need that injected right into my vein. Just kidding. Vaccines are fine, but I take that. I'll take that too while we're at it.
Yeah. Do you have the Kenny Garrett flu vaccine?
Yeah, yeah. I just need all 3. Give me the COVID, give me the flu, and give me the Kenny G. It straight into my veins while we're at it. Oh, but no, really. And yeah, just some of those extended techniques that we talked about, we hear it there. Just almost some of the overblowing, the growling, some of the overtones he's getting to there. It's all there, but it's like it doesn't feel forced. It's just it's so good. It's so effortless. It's Kenny Garrett. It's our Kenny G for sure. But then we get a bit of an interlude between the sax solos where Benito kind of comes in and adds some colors and trills. Not really a solo, more of just an interlude. And then we get Pharaoh coming in at 409, and it's just more of this very spiritual, soulful playing here. Are there 2 more spiritual saxophone players on the planet, Max? I don't know if there are.
There have been in jazz history, but they are probably all dead.
Yeah.
I mean, Train, there are moments of Train that come to mind. Maybe Albert Eiler sometimes, although I prefer Pharaoh Sanders to him. Sorry. But, and then, very spiritual, just straight ahead blues players too, that are out there. But they're all dead. Unfortunately, so is Pharaoh Sanders now, but we still have Kenny Garrett to listen to.
Yeah, but these guys, as far as just that spirituality to the music, they're some of the best to ever do it, and they kind of span throughout different generations, and it's awesome. So yeah, back to this Pharaoh solo. His vibrato is just, in my opinion, it's so heavenly. We get some really gritty kind of growling playing here. So let's just listen to some of that kind of gritty technique here and the vibrato here from 442 to 506 from Pharaoh Sanders here. Yeah.
Yeah, great sound. And, some people may be surprised that we're so enamored with longer notes. Again, they're not just going ham on how many 16th notes can they play. It's a different approach. It's a different value, but it's just as valuable.
Yeah.
That's what I got to say to that.
And Max, what is, I asked you, I want you to say it here on the podcast. What is that thing that when we're getting like that kind of really kind of overblown in your face sound, what is he doing there? Because it's not quite a growl there. What is that technique that he's doing there?
Well, on a couple of those notes, it was the lower B flat and stuff. It's kind of like an overtone where you're fingering that low note, but what's coming out is the same note or a fifth away from that note in the middle register. And so you kind of overblow and you kind of tighten. Oh God, excuse me. Hello, burp. You kind of overblow, and then you sort of pinch a little bit your bottom lip into your mouthpiece more. So usually when we're talking about jazz embouchure on the saxophone, you generally want your bottom jaw and lip to be flexible and to be kind of looser, not too loose, but kind of flexible. And you want it to be able to move when you're in the different ranges on the saxophone. But if you're doing those overtones, you kind of just tighten up a little bit on that jaw. You don't want to be tight, but you firm it up. You firm up the bottom lip and jaw a little bit so that you can make sure that you're getting those higher tones when fingering a lower note.
Yeah, when I heard that section, I was just like, whoa, what is, like, I have to ask Max what's going on here, because you can tell he's like manipulating the timbre and the tone of the instrument in a way that's super cool. It almost sounded like a violinist, like injected into what he was playing. That's like how kind of like punchy the sound is there, and it's just really cool, and you kind of just get to hear his full range of his playing there.
And he also has a very specific vibrato.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, it's wide and deliberate and in your face. And he's also known just for kind of overblowing, which is just putting more air through the instrument than you need. And so that kind of gives that bigger spiritual presence that we're also getting from Pharaoh Sanders.
Yeah, and so we can hear kind of Kenny Garrett on the organ. We mentioned that he's on the organ some in this track. We can hear it in the background. It's nothing super crazy. He's not playing anything super intricate, but it's just all about the texture here from Kenny Garrett. So, and let's listen to what we mean by Pharaoh Sanders playing being spiritual and just how much Pharaoh can do with a few notes. We're kind of just hammering home these points, but it's just, there's so many great examples of it. And I want you to listen for how he's able to build the end section of this solo so well, and it kind of reaches this breaking point and then this scream at the very end of his solo. So let's listen for that here. This is at 5:34. Just two notes. Woo! Jesus.
He just screams it out at the end. And I love how he ends his solo. There's another one later in the album where he ends kind of in a similar way. You just scream it out. And it
just like builds up, the tension just builds and builds, and as he kind of, it starts a little rhythmic and he's getting into those kind of few notes, but then he starts to build it and he starts to get more gritty and more punchy, and then at the end it's just this full out release of all of his tension with that scream. It just, oh man, it feels so connected. It feels so soulful, so spiritual. It's just, yeah, that's, oh man, that's Pharaoh Sanders for you.
And again, some people may listen to that. I mean, if you can feel it, you can feel it. You know what we're talking about.
Yeah.
But I can sense some people listen to that and go, well, he's not giving me much, technically speaking, or he's not giving me much that makes a lot of sense. But you got to go within the pockets. You got to think about it from the perspective of the groove, the feel, the sense of blues, the soul, the other ways we can, base off our solo on, that these two are just masters at doing.
Yeah, and it's all about the context of the music, too. Like, this song, if they were playing, like, a bebop tune, like a rhythm changes, and they were doing this, like, on a 200 beats per minute rhythm changes, that wouldn't make any sense, right? It's all about context. But in this context, the way that this song, the feeling, the emotions of this song, this song is portraying with the kind of ode to African spiritual music, this is exactly what you'd want, and they're in the context of the music. It is super musical, and it's more musical than that, in my opinion, than if you were just to play a bunch of technical moving lines or whatever. I think this is more fitting in that context.
Absolutely. It's all about context and what is the song trying to portray? How can you play what you, how can you solo in a way that is not only musically appropriate, but can bring everything out even more, and it's not just you being featured over top of everything. You're in conjunction with what's going on. And if you can hear, especially the drums, and even keys, they're all going with Pharaoh. They're in there. They're all on the same page. It's really a sort of level of connectivity that you don't hear from everybody.
Yeah, it's not just him soloing, it's the group soloing, and he's just the one that's, featured during that section. They're all playing it together. But then we get some organ kind of featured stuff, and it's not really like a solo per se. It's just kind of Kenny Garrett on the organs messing around with the texture, the timbre, the different vibrato you can get out of the organ. He does do some licks, but it doesn't feel like a solo, like a fully developed solo. It feels more just like lots of rhythmic and stuff going on, which is cool. It's nice. It definitely adds a layer to the tune. And then we kind of drop down in dynamics after this organ feature into the sax melody once through the changes, and then just a really nice retardando to end, which I think is just a perfect way to end this one out, in my opinion.
Yeah, it's a great ending. I think I would have liked some back and forth between the two saxophones. Yeah. I mean, you don't want to overdo it. It can be cliche or overdone, but I think some interplay towards the end of this, some soulful, back and forth blues licks or whatever, back and forth screaming would have been really the icing on the cake for me. But I understand, you don't have to go there, but that would have been a cool thing for me. That's what came into my head, the way to end that one.
Yeah, I think that definitely could have been a cool way to do it as well. For sure.
Then we get the title track on the album, Sketches of MD. Dwayne Gunnels, do you know who MD is?
Well, I think it's Miles Davis. Do you know who MD is?
I thought it was Maggie Disseldorf, but I'm just messing.
Oh, man. Max told me that in the pre-show. I was like, Max, what are you talking about?
It's just a joke. You got to have some fun. But yes, it's all about Miles Davis. And like I said, Kenny Garrett was a part of Miles Davis's band. So this is sort of an ode to Miles. And I kind of like the title of it because it's Sketches of Miles Davis. It's not Miles verbatim, but there's elements of Miles Davis's fusion approach in particular. And you can kind of hear some of the sounds that the saxes are making kind of sound like a muted trumpet when they come in with the melody. So that's a really cool thing about this track. It's just all the sonic elements of it. It begins with a rhythmic ostinato shared by both the piano and the bass. It's sort of a 2-bar ostinato with longer note melody from the saxes. And the melody, like I said, sounds like almost a muted trumpet at times. And it's reflecting that influence of Miles on these cats, specifically Kenny Garrett. The melody is spot on if you're going for the Miles thing, in my opinion. And it sounds like there's some effects that are used, maybe some delay at the ends of phrases, and lots of synthesizers and different sounds we're getting. Then there's these electronic sort of sound sweeps right around the 220 mark, 212 to 230 or so. And it reminds me of lightsabers. And I just thought this is like a scene from Star Wars that we're getting.
Yeah, do we want to listen to that so people kind of understand? Because that is spot on. It literally sounds like a scene out of Star Wars.
Yeah, let's do it. Yeah, like 212 to 230 or so. You probably don't have to do that whole chunk, but some of that, yeah.
Yeah, let's just get an idea because that description is spot on. Yeah, it just I don't know if they're.
I thought Luke Skywalker was going to come around the corner and come at me.
It definitely feels like kind of what they're going for too, like kind of this like spacey, synthy feel to it. Do you think that they're playing their saxophones through like a pedal or through a computer with like a synth, or do you think they're playing EWIs? What do you think this is? I was trying to understand this. An EWI definitely could sound like this, but I don't know if these guys played EWIs or not.
I am not an expert in that sort of thing, so I don't know. My suspicion is that they're playing into a pedal.
Yeah, that's what it feels like.
and they can manipulate it that way. And we talked about maybe Kenny Garrett had done some of that when we were talking about 5-piece band live and his sounds on there. But I guess in some of these live performances, he did pull out pedals and effects and stuff, or still does to this day, I'm sure. So yeah, I think we're getting some of that here.
Yeah, we're definitely, the saxophone sound is being manipulated one way or another for sure. This is not something you can do just with your embouchure here.
Yeah, so a lot of different sounds here we're getting on sketches of MD. And then we get these sort of sweeping string noises. It sounds like he's sweeping across the inside of the piano at times. That's around the 4-minute mark, 4:16 or so. So a lot of different sounds we're getting, and they're taking their time on this one in terms of development. It's all about emphasizing the different sonic approaches that you can get. And this, to me, is just they're musically enamored with sound, which does describe some of the Miles Davis fusion stuff. So they're really pulling that off. Around the 5:30 mark starts a real saxophone solo. There's great use of repetition. There's some really nice moments where the alto solo just kind of shines, and there's some added interplay from the tenor saxophone from Pharaoh Sanders, and he's messing around with overtones, and there's some cool sounds there. Let's listen to that together. This is 6:11 to about 6:40.
Yeah, you can really kind of get a feel for like the spacey feel for it there.
Yeah, it's very spacey, and I love that sort of background interplay that we're getting from not only Pharaoh Sanders, but also from the keys too. A lot of great interaction there that's subtle, but it's done really well. Soon after all that, it completely sort of bottoms out, and the ostinato stops, and it's just melodic movement with lots of space. There's some insertion from the keys, bass, and drums as Kenny Garrett starts to get on the mic and introduce the band. And another cool aspect to this is hearing how Kenny Garrett introduces the band. A lot of energy. I love how he'll repeat the players' names multiple times. So this is an example of that, just so you're aware, just so you can get a glimpse into the live performance aspect to this record. This is 8:15 to about 8:40.
Dr. Reed at the bass. Professor Reed's at the bass. And at the drums, Jemai Williams. Jemai Williams at the drums. And at the tenor saxophone, the great Pharaoh Sanders. Pharaoh Sanders. The great Pharaoh Sanders. Come on, thank you.
Right, so he's going, the great Pharaoh Sanders, the great Pharaoh Sanders. There's a great saxophone player from Wilmington named Benny Hill who also does that. So that's just something I particularly enjoy listening to, is how does a player, especially a leader of a group, introduce the band? How do they interact with the audience? I think sometimes in jazz we can get away from that aspect of the experience of performing. The audience does matter. We have to interact with them. We have to be able to get on the mic and introduce the band and talk about songs and just be open and a little vulnerable with the audience, and don't ignore them. I mean, in some ways you can if something's going wrong, but you really want to just have a nice interaction. You don't have to overdo it, but I think Kenny Garrett does a great job of doing that here.
Yeah, I think his energy is just really great. And the energy in the room feels really cool here.
Overall, I think this track is really cool to listen for. It's sonic, just variety. They end it with the melody, and it sounds like kind of a drone-sounding bass, but he's just playing with the bow, extended sounds, lengthening notes on the bass. Overall, I do think it's missing something. It leaves me a bit unsatisfied, which is disappointing coming from the fact that it's a title track the album itself is called Sketches of MD, live at the Iridium. And unfortunately for me, Sketches of MD, the song, kind of misses some moments to me, and it's just not coming across as well as the first two tracks on the album.
Yeah, I do. I think this track has some really like interesting aspects, and the sonic exploration with all the synth sounds is super cool. But I agree. I just don't know if it makes sense as like the title track. It does feel like something that could be in like the soundtrack to a movie, though. I think that it's just like the sonic kind of the things we're hearing. It is pretty unique. So I agree there.
Yeah, and then we get back into a great groove with the next track called Wayne's Thing, which I think refers to the great Wayne Shorter.
Yeah, so the next track, Wayne's Thing, I agree. I think it's definitely talking about Wayne Shorter, and this is just a really fun groove on this track with some syncopation from the keyboard, and I really love the breaks during the final couple bars of the form. I think they're just like super funky, and I love kind of Benito Gonzalez and Kenny Garrett just vibing here through certain parts of like the beginning of the song, and I just think it's super funky. Let's take a listen for that at around the 2-minute mark in this track. Yeah.
Those breaks really do make it. Those are killer.
Dude, yeah, it's so killer. And I just love the kind of the rhythmic interplay there, and just kind of, yeah, Benito taking the breaks there, and that last one, that's he gets super funky with it there. I love that.
Mm-hmm.
And then Kenny kind of hops on a clav-esque synth, and I think he's playing this synth like a keyboard, not like a saxophone synth sound. I'm pretty sure, but I can't be 100% sure.
I wasn't sure either. It sounded like a synthesizer, but towards the end of the solo, it sounds more like a sort of pedal sound or something on a saxophone sound, where it sounded more like his saxophone sound at certain moments. But I don't know if that's just the sound of the synthesizer, and there are moments that it's just I'm wanting to hear the saxophone. I don't know specifically what type of instrument that is.
Yeah, it sounds like a clav, like a clavinet, but like a synthy clavinet, not like your straightforward Stevie Wonder kind of clav.
Right.
So to me, it sounds like he's playing like a synth, like a keyboard, but it's hard to know exactly without seeing it ourselves. You know, you could get that sound out of an EWI as well if you want to, because technically that's just a synthesizer that's, you know, it's shaped like a saxophone. The keys are like a saxophone. You blow into it to get the sound, but it is just a synthesizer in a sense as well. So, yeah, at the end of the section with Kenny on the synth here, they do a break and everyone drops out and the audience thinks that the song is over, so they start clapping, and then the band brings it right back in. I think this is just so funky. I love this, and I think this is something that we tend to do sometimes, and it's really well done, especially on like funk tunes or like groove tunes where, you know, you can, the groove, they stop, but the groove kind of never leaves the room, and when they come back in, it's just like filling this void that was there. So I think it's really cool. We're gonna take a listen for it.
I'm ready. It's a hip moment, and you and I have done that before. So really cool technique.
We definitely do something similar on like a tune Red Baron by Billy Cobham that we play. Cool. Let's take a listen for it. Yeah.
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 Yeah, it's just a break. They're not ending it, guys.
Oh yeah.
But it sounds, they think it is.
God, yeah, it's just so grooving. Like, especially that pickup, like, really grooves too. Yeah, that's a hip moment in my opinion. And then, when we come back in, Kenny continues to solo on the synth. You heard that just there, and then we get some kind of more spacey, like pad synth sounds from Benito, and it really changes the texture of the groove a little bit. From like he was doing kind of rhythmic electric piano stuff, and now he's doing more like a pad synth on the groove, and kind of changes the texture that we're getting there. And so during the next break, we get like clapping like on the beat during the break, and I can't tell if that's the band or the audience that's doing that clapping. I don't know if someone in the band is like leading the audience to clap or not. And then we get Kenny Garrett hops back on the organ as Pharaoh takes over to solo. They dive pretty deep into the funk, and Pharaoh does his typical thing, just super funky, soulful, some screams, all the Pharaoh things. And then after the Pharaoh solo, it's just the rhythm section with Garrett at the organ still, and they're just kind of grooving it out. And then at the end, they do a nice fade out. Max, what did you think about the fade out? I know Max loves a good fade out.
Well, it's no surprise I am not big on this fade out. And I was hoping there would not be a fade out on this because it's a live album. So, but I guess they just grew for so long. They said, okay, we'll just fade it out.
Yeah. And I think maybe, I mean, I'm thinking a little more practical here. Maybe this track went on for another 3 minutes, and to fit it on the record, we kind of made this point before. To fit it on the record, they're like, well, we can't throw that extra 5 minutes on the vinyl. It won't physically fit on a vinyl LP. So that could have been what happened here. Is like, oh man, there was an ending, but we got to cut something out. We'll just fade out the end of this tune where they're kind of grooving it out for a couple more minutes.
Yeah, which is one way to do it, but I don't know. It's like sometimes I think they're spot on, and sometimes I wanted a different type of ending, or I wanted to hear what they were doing in the moment on how they ended it. So I don't know. Sometimes I dig a good fade out, but this one was one I was not too appreciative of. So I'm par for the course here.
Yeah, I think I agree. I think there could have been really cool ways to end this tune, but it just kind of lacks that substantial ending. You could do something really funky to end this tune, but we don't really get that. We just kind of get a fade out here.
Right. Now, I do want us to go back and just listen to one lick that is being played. This is minute marker number 4. Basically, just do 4 to 4:04 or so. It's just a must lick in this type of tune or in this context. Yeah, that's it. That's it. I was like, I heard that. That is the must lick on that one.
That's just funky. That's just all funk right there.
Yeah.
Oh man, I love that.
That if you do that, you're golden.
Yeah.
On a tune like that.
Oh man. All right. Yeah. So that's definitely that's all about the funk on that one. And I really dig that groove. Max, why don't you get us going into the final track on the album entitled Happy People?
Yeah, so here Kenny Garrett is ending not only the album, but I imagine his set on the gig with his tune Happy People, which is a commonly known Garrett composition. I think around this time he was known for ending his gigs with this tune. I kind of prefer the original version on his 2002 album of the same name, but this one is really cool for a lot of different reasons. There's a lot of great energy, and we'll get into another reason why it's a cool version of Happy People. But as it starts, Garrett introduces it on the mic, and then the drums enter first before the keys and bass. So I really dig that layering. That's a little, unexpected, where you're starting with the drums, and then that brings in keys and bass. You don't always have to start with keys and bass or an 8-bar intro all together. You can start with drums and go from there. So I like that layering there. And then when Kenny Garrett comes in, he comes in with that A theme melody. I thought he would riff a little bit and then come in with the head, but he comes in just right with the head when he enters in on the alto sax. He does play off of the melody at times, but he's sticking mainly with the main theme. It's sort of an AAB form with 8 bars in each section. And so they go through that 2 times through. And that main hook that we've grown accustomed to with the melody of the song is at 120. And so that's kind of the B theme melody that they continue to play off of later on in the song.
Yeah, and that section just really gives me like some James Carter organ trio vibes for some reason. Just like the melody, the rhythm there, I'm getting like some like James Carter kind of vibes there.
Definitely in the instrumentation that we're getting here. The original version isn't quite like that. I don't think it's organ. It's a little more straight ahead. There's vocals also on the original, or at least on that particular 2002 album I'm thinking of. So it's morphed into something like this at this time, 2002 to 2008. That's a good 6 years. And it may be older than that. I just know it's on an album called Happy People from 2002. So he's probably tinkered with the song, and it's just a great closer of a set. So they're doing it here, and it's a great groove. It's a little more in the moment fun, I think, which is what you're alluding to with the James Carter organ trio connection there.
Yeah.
They're all about that. So we're getting that here. The saxophone seems to start to solo a little bit around the 2:30 mark, but then it pivots focus to the keys, and the keys have like a snippet of a solo, and then we get the synthesizer in. Sorry, that's hard for me to say. The synth is back in, and that's Kenny Garrett coming back into solo on the synth, not on the alto sax. So I want us to listen to that together. It's sort of an interesting transition, a little awkward, but it kind of makes sense. This is 248 to 333. Yeah, it's so great. So great. But I want to, it's kind of like back and forth between the two sounds, and it's kind of like there's not really one soloist in that moment, and I thought that was just a really cool snippet to listen to.
Yeah, it's cool. It almost feels like Benito's like taking a solo a little bit, and Kenny Garrett it's like they start to pass the baton, but instead of like passing the baton like we talked about in solos, they're just kind of like tossing it back and forth to each other, and no one's really taking it and running with it. They're just kind of like bouncing it, like hacky sacking it back and forth to each other. That's what it feels like to me.
Yeah, it's a baton toss, not a baton pass. It's like, I guess, more like a peace pipe.
Like,
wait, let me have another hit.
Oh man.
So that's a cool moment. And then after that synthesizer type solo, we get back to the hook, and then we get the other cool aspect of this version that I was getting at earlier, and that is the false endings. This song has at least 3 of them. I don't know. There might be 4 or 5 false endings altogether, but I want us to check out the first one. This is 440 to 522. I love the quarter notes that are played to get back into it. Check it out for yourself, and then we'll talk about it. Right, so you thought it was over, but no, there's more.
They really sell it too. They like fully commit to selling that it's the end of the song.
Yeah, it's really false ending. Like you really are in there because they hold out that chord and then out of nowhere they do those quarter notes back into it. So I think that's a great moment. And believe me, it happens again and again. So after that first one, he kind of gets on the mic, getting the crowd into it, and he starts to get the crowd to sing that B melody hook line that depicts the melody, the main chunk hook of it all that's really recognizable. As they get to play it again, which leads to a second false ending that they get out of with the same quarter notes onto that B melody hook again. Then he gets on the mic again and introduces the band once more, repeating their names multiple times, as I was talking about with another track. And then they do a third false ending. And this one really seemed like the end to me because Kenny Garrett goes off more like you would as a saxophone or horn player would on a final chord. And just really, being soulful. And it seems like they're really going to end it, but they don't yet. So this is 8:15 to 8:45, another false ending. I literally laughed out loud when that one happened because I thought for sure they were done. Yeah. I thought for sure that was the last one.
I think everyone else did too. I was going to ask how you feel about this because I read some reviews where people, I think Downbeat magazine, they were kind of critical of this, but for me, I love it, especially because it's like a live recording. If you do this in a studio, it's honestly just kind of annoying because no one's there to cheer like it's the end. But in a live recording, it's just like there's this party going on, right? And they're just like, yeah, party's over. And then it's like, yeah. And then they're just like, nah, party's still going. Like, we're still here. We're still grooving. So to me, I enjoy it. I think it's fun.
I think it speaks a lot to the musical proclivities one needs to have on a live stage versus a studio album. I think, these are elements that really scream performer.
Yep.
And sometimes straight ahead listeners or critics are hesitant to praise that. And I think maybe if they had just done one false ending, the critics would have liked it a little bit better. But because they do it 3 or 4 times, I guess to them it gets old. It seems overdone. It seems overplayed. It's not getting the sort of appeal or effect you think it is. But I don't know. I think in the moment, if I was there, I really would have enjoyed it. I think it's a great aspect to this version. And I really do appreciate these false endings. And I know some people won't, but I think it speaks to the musical presence that one may need to have on a gig like this, where you're interacting with the audience. The audience is in tune to what you're doing. And contextually, to me, it makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think in the context of what's going on, it makes a whole lot of sense. It could be seen as overdone, but to me, I don't feel like I'm bothered by it as much as obviously the people, whoever wrote the Downbeat review was. To me, this track really kind of reminds me of like some of the Corey Henry and like the Funk Apostles stuff that they do. I've seen them live a few times. It just really feels like that kind of feel good, uplifting music that kind of just gets the party going, gets the people into it, and just with the false endings, like we're just, keeps people happy, energized, lifts the party up. That's just what I'm getting from it.
It's humorful. There's a lot of character in it. It screams personality. And there's another snippet I want us to listen to from this track right after that third false ending. This is 9:48 to 10:10, where Kenny Garrett kind of plays more with the audience, and he kind of does it in a sort of hip hop fashion, where he's interplaying with the audience singing, and it's a really cool moment. Let's listen to it.
Yeah, and one thing that kind of speaks to this as well, I want to point this out before we listen to it, is at a certain point he has the audience start to sing the melody. And there's this really fun interaction. He's getting the audience involved. And it's just like, this is obviously not a studio recording. This is a live recording. And there's so much personality here, like Max said. So listen as well for him and his interaction with the audience, as well as the audience participating in the song by singing the melody.
What? Come on, what? Come on. What? Oh. Come on, what? Come on, what? What? I can't hear you, what? Come on, what?
Oh, no, I stopped it.
That's okay.
Yeah.
I mean, he just kind of keeps doing that as it builds and builds, and then they play the hook again, which actually leads to a final ending.
Yeah.
So they eventually do end it. But I think those moments are important because they really show the personality of Kenny Garrett, of the music, and it's really fun. Yep. I think one thing you and I really agree on or see eye to eye on is the element of fun that in most recordings is necessary to some degree in order to really enjoy it. And here we get a lot of fun. And I think there's some jazz out there where that is lacking. And to me, that can be off-putting for an audience, for a listener, and even at times for a player.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. And that's why I think one thing that this is really redeeming about this album is, like, I can agree that there are sometimes albums that are super well put together, they're arranged super well, the playing is fantastic, but, like, it might not be as fun. And, like, it's not as fun to listen to as something like this. And when I listen to this, like, this is just something I want to put on in my car and, like, listen to. This is fun. It's, like, fun to listen to. And I think that there's a lot to be said for that. And I really do appreciate Kenny Garrett's spirit, his personality. He just seems so fun to be around, so fun to interact with. And not all jazz musicians have necessarily been that way throughout history. So it's almost relieving to have a soul like Kenny Garrett and his music here. It's fun. This album is fun to listen to.
And I wasn't aware of his ability to interact with the audience in that way prior to listening to this record. It really just opened up my perception of Kenny Garrett, the performer, Kenny Garrett, the musician, Kenny Garrett, the person, the human being. We get a lot of that here. Whereas in other moments that I've heard Kenny Garrett, I didn't get as much of that as I'm getting here on this record. So that's another cool aspect of this particular album, Live at the Iridium, is we're getting not only Kenny Garrett playing great, but we're getting more of his self, more vision into who he is as a performer and as a person.
Yeah, and I think that it's super important to kind of understand where musicians are coming from, kind of understand their story. So I love what Max is saying there. Is there anything you want to talk about with that track before we move into our top threes and our not so hot?
Just real quick, I do have one critique, which is I do wish there was an actual saxophone feature or solo, or maybe some interaction between sax and keys, specifically just back and forth, maybe longer than what they did or whatever. I think one article was saying that this track is a little underwhelming for straight ahead fans. And I would not necessarily go as far as to say it's underwhelming. I just wish there was more actual improvisation within the context of this track.
Yeah, I can completely agree there. I think they really are honing in on just the being in the moment, the groove, the feel. But I kind of wish that it is the final track. We could have gotten, just a little bit of a solo from everyone to kind of close it out and kind of hear from everyone, get a drum solo, get a keyboard solo. Give me a little bit of everyone to close it out. But they kind of choose to just go in a different direction. And I don't think that it's disappointing, or I don't think it's bad. I could have gone for something else, but I don't think that it makes the track worse necessarily just because, I think it could have gone in a different direction.
Right. Yeah. Spot on. All right. Are we ready for the top threes and the not so hot?
Yeah. And for this one, Max and I think this is like one where top three, not so hot. I think there's like you could maybe flip one or two, but it's, in my opinion, it's pretty obvious. So Max, we have the exact same top 3 and Not So Hot. So Max, you just go ahead and tell them both of ours and we can kind of talk about it.
Well, both you and I put number 1, Intro to Africa. I think the pocket is undeniably appealing. I think the solos are stellar. The feel, the groove, the human element that's present in a lot of the sounds that we're getting and the approaches that we're getting on Intro to Africa is not only, it was a pleasant surprise, but it was beyond appealing. It was attractive. It was identifiable with the human experience. And I think it grew so hard. It, to me, was the obvious number 1, Intro to Africa.
Yeah, I love that tune. I think that they're just connecting with the music so deeply. It's like, oh man, it's killer. It's honestly one of the most interesting tracks to listen to that we've listened to on the podcast. We've listened to some really great tracks, but this is just, it's a fantastic track, and they're playing within the context of the music. It's perfection in my opinion.
Right. Number 2 was The Ring, which is the first track on the album. And I think a critic may have switched those. A critic may say, The Ring is obviously the number 1, but I think it's the number 2. I think it's a great track. It's really hammering the Coltrane McCoy Tyner sound. It's really hammering spiritual playing. I think these two, Kenny Garrett and Pharaoh Sanders work really well together, and the group is all on the same page all of the time, and that's not necessarily easy to do, especially on a tune like The Ring. So it was undeniably great. I just appreciate some of the things in Intro to Africa just a smidge more.
Yeah, I'm on the same page there. I think that The Ring, definitely compositionally, it's a fantastic tune, and it's definitely might be compositionally a little bit more interesting than what's going on in Intro to Africa. But I think, in my opinion, just the context, everything going on in the Intro in Africa, I think it's undeniably number 1, and The Ring is just a very close second, in my opinion.
Right. And number 3, we got Wayne's Thing, which was the funky groove one on the album that I think alluded to the great Wayne Shorter, and there's some great moments in that, so that felt so good. It had to be number 3. The Not So Hot, Sketches of MD, Maggie Disseldorf. No, I'm messing. Miles Davis. Sketches of Miles Davis, which is the title track of the album. The album is called Sketches of MD Live at the Iridium. And to me, it just misses the mark. It's cool in its emphasis on sonic approaches. The different sound elements we're getting are vast on that track. And it does scream, sort of Miles Davis fusion, not only in its approach and sound, but in the timbre of the instruments we're getting. It's very synth friendly, I would say. So it's really cool in that it's achieving, I think, what it wants to achieve. However, it just doesn't necessarily do it for me musically, all in all.
Yeah, I think, it's not a bad track. It almost feels kind of more like an interlude. It's really interesting to listen to because of the sonic approach. But yeah, it just doesn't, I don't feel like this title represents the album very well. I don't think that the whole album is like a Sketches of Miles Davis. There's kind of just 5 different things going on in this album. That's cool. I appreciate it, but it feels like it's drawing from like many different places, not just Miles Davis. It's drawing from Coltrane. It's drawing from some more gospel, happy people, that kind of thing's more gospel feeling. It doesn't feel like this is a Sketches of Miles Davis album. So to make that the title track, when this track isn't even the strongest track on the album, you could call it The Ring, the album. Like, I don't know. I'm scratching my head a little bit at this one.
That's a great point. It doesn't describe every track on the album. It doesn't describe the overall approach or concept to the record. The concept isn't, we're going to take, 5 or 6 tracks as an ode to my time with Miles Davis as his saxophone player. It's, I'm playing original music with a great cast of musicians and exploring everything we can from sonic approach, all what are the different sounds we can get? What are the different ways we can be spiritual? What are the different grooves we can get that feel great? The whole album is not an ode to Miles Davis, so why call it Sketches of MD? Just do the song Sketches of MD and do a different title for the album. I think you're hitting the nail on the head with that.
Yeah, it leaves me scratching my head a little bit. So, but let's get into our overall album thoughts, give our ratings, and then we'll jump into talk about what album we're going to be doing next week. So, for my overall thoughts on the album and my rating, I think that the pairing of Garrett and Sanders is just such a soulful, spiritual duo of jazz greatness that they just bring so much energy and spirit to this live recording. This album is a fun listen, and honestly, I wish that I had been there at the concert because it seems like it would have just been such a blast to be there in person. The entire group gels so well together, and the rhythm section is really well-rounded and a pleasure to listen to. Kenny Garrett has not failed to impress us yet on the podcast, and this live recording is just more of the same. And one thing that's even better than Kenny's playing is it just always feels so right to me. You know, his playing's great, but it just feels like he's playing what's right in the moment. It feels like he's playing from so deep down into his heart and soul, and that's something that I definitely truly revere from Kenny Garrett. And then the late, great Pharaoh Sanders is cut from a very similar cloth, and he's just really fun to listen to on this album. Both of these guys are so masterful at some of these extended techniques, the growls, the screams, and just so many different ways that one could make music out of a saxophone. Pharaoh has continued to be missed, but we're super glad to be able to further his legacy through his playing and the soulful spirit on this podcast. And the rhythm section is just kind of an underrated aspect of the recording because they aren't individually featured a whole lot, which is I kind of wish they were. At times I wish I got a drum solo, a little bit more from the keys, maybe a bass solo, but they're all really killing and they're really locked in together super tight. So the rhythm section is definitely underrated, but it's kind of easy to miss when they're not super featured. And they're all it's very obvious that they're well listened and very versatile in their playing from the different kind of tracks on the album. I think we kind of touched on this, but Sketches of MD misses the mark as the title track, but it's still interesting. It just feels more like an interlude sort of piece than the main attraction to the album. And overall, I think this album is just really enjoyable. It's fun to listen to. I'll definitely be continuing to jam to it in the car from time to time. And I think that this is more than worth a listen. And for that reason, I gave it an 8.1 out of 10.
I would concur with a lot of points. I think the greatness of Kenny Garrett is seemingly undeniable. His soloistic prowess is matched nicely by this group, in particular the added pairing of the spiritual and ever-present Pharaoh Sanders, as well as a spot-on rhythm section with Nat Reeves, Benito Gonzalez, and Jameer Williams. A variety of sonic expressions are present, with the use of synths, different keyboard tones, and the innumerable sound characteristics that define Kenny Garrett's and Pharaoh Sanders' abilities to manipulate tone, sound, and texture. It may be argued that there are one too many saxophone squeals for the average listener, yet they are executed well and definitely are used in appropriate musical ways. There is also an emphasis on groove, as witnessed on Intro to Africa, Wayne's Thing, and Happy People. The pocket, tempo, and overall feel on Intro to Africa is a nice surprise and one of the most musically satisfying selections on the album. All three rhythm section members treat each tune exceptionally well, as a range of styles and approaches are included here, from the Coltrane-esque opener The Ring to the funky Wayne's Thing. Sketches of MD, the song itself, is certainly an ode to Miles Davis and effectively explores varying sonic realities, yet seems more like an accompaniment to a movie scene rather than a possible stellar title track to a live album. Another slight disappointment was found in the lack of improvisatory exploration on Happy People. This is a fun track, no doubt, that feels great, yet it left me desiring more, even though it's the second longest track on the record. Also, a drum or bass feature would have been a nice addition somewhere on this album. I do, however, appreciate the elements of fun and musical exploration that are present on most of the album. Also, Kenny Garrett's personality is well on display when talking and interacting with the crowd on the microphone. Altogether, this is an interesting record and recording from Kenny Garrett that delivers groove and excellent expressive playing. While it certainly won't be in the running for one of the best jazz albums ever, it's definitely worth your attention. Strap in. This one is a fun ride. Overall score is 7.9 out of 10.
Yeah, I think you make some really great points there. I think we have a lot of similar thoughts on this album, but one thing we agree on, that it's just really fun to listen to, and so we'd both suggest taking a listen to it. And so our combined Jazz Jam score on this one is going to be an 8.0 out of 10 on this album. Max, why don't you tell us what we've got coming up next week? We're going to be getting into a classic album, and man, Max was swinging for the fences with this one. He picked just an all-time album. Max, what are we getting into next week?
Yeah, we're getting into one of the, sort of essential hard bop recordings of 1964. This is the Sidewinder from the great Lee Morgan. Also features Joe Hinn on tenor, Joe Henderson, the great Barry Harris on piano. We got Bob Crenshaw on bass, Billy Higgins on drums. It's an all-star cast. It was one of the crossover successful jazz albums of the mid-60s that was not only successful in the jazz circuit, but it also made the pop charts. And so I think it is still one of Blue Note's most highest selling records. It might be their highest selling record ever. I'm not entirely sure on that, but the Sidewinder, it's a great recording, a great crossover selection to talk about. And we haven't really gotten into Lee Morgan yet, so it's going to be fun getting into him and his sound and his approach and what he did with the Sidewinder, because there's a lot to talk about with that.
Yeah, Max said we haven't talked about Lee Morgan yet, so we're just going to dive just head first into the deep end of Lee Morgan. Like, we're not going to ease you in. We're going to go into, like, the album by Lee Morgan, and there's other great albums, but I'm super excited. I listened to this album a lot, but I haven't listened to it in a while, so I'm super excited to go back and listen to it and kind of listen to it in a more analytical way, because like I've listened to it so many times, but it's been a while, so I'm excited to re-dive all the way into it.
It's also been a minute since I've checked it out myself. I mean, I've listened to it, of course, and the Sidewinder is a cool sort of funky blues tune. But yeah, it'll be great to really get in a deep dive into it, to talk about Joe Henderson a little bit. Barry Harris is great too. So, we are in for a treat of exploring everything there is to the Sidewinder. Yeah,
so definitely join us next week when we do that. Before we go, I do want to say, just make sure you're checking out our Instagram, the Jazz Jam Podcast on Instagram. Feel free to send us an email, thejazzjampodcast@gmail.com. Our website is, it's come so far. I think it's just such a wealth of knowledge of just places to check out, a resource if you're like looking for new albums. If you haven't listened to every podcast or you don't have time, you can kind of just get our ideas, our overall thoughts there. You can see what different artists we've reviewed, the albums. One of my favorite things about the podcast is our power rankings list, where you can kind of see how everything ranks against each other. I think that's one of my favorite things about the website. So definitely just go check it out, see what we've got going on there. It's a fun tool and resource. And if you want to, send us a recommendation, an album request. We definitely want those. We'll be more than willing to check out some of the music that y'all recommend, and just reach out to us with any questions you have about anything. We'd love to hear from you. So without further ado, this has been an episode of the Jazz Jam Podcast, and we'll catch you next week with the Sidewinder from Lee Morgan.